Hello and welcome to this video on making salami. Before we get into the depths of this, it is important to distinguish salami from many other meats and processed foods for a very simple reason. It is both processed and cured. Where sausages are processed, they are not cured. Where bacon is cured, it is not processed. Salami is both. We make this point as the combination of both curing and processing salami means bacteria that are involved in salami are spread throughout by processing and given time to grow by curing. This is a problem when you fail to take steps to stop or limit the growth. In fact, it is dangerous if not deadly. With that very important warning out of the way, let's get to the details and process. First, to make salami, you will both need some equipment and ingredients. Both of these areas are important, as making salami with the right tools, or more accurately without the right tools, is almost impossible. And you can do it, but it requires a ridiculous degree of dedication, time, and effort. First, you will need a meat grinder. Again, you can get away with something like a sharp knife and time, but a meat grinder is much easier. It will cut the meat into small chunks and then mix them for you. If you can get a meat grinder, get one with a sausage stuffing attachment. If you can't, you will need to get your own or use a funnel and something very solid to push the meat into the sausage casing. You will also, if you're not using prepared salami kits, a spice grinder and the spices that go with it. You'll also want a string. This will be used to both hang and dry the salami sausage. The final piece of equipment per se will be an appropriate location that is both dry and relatively low in humidity, although controlling humidity and temperature will be key to this. An appropriate place to dry and age or mature, which is effectively curing the salami sausage, is essential. Without this, you'll find that things just don't work the way they're meant to. In terms of ingredients, the most common ingredient, and arguably the only common ingredient to every kind of salami, will be casings. These are traditionally intestines, although a modern salami may be made with artificial casings instead. These are not much different from actual real intestine, it's just made artificially. We're going to assume a 1 kilogram or roughly a 2.1 pound salami. The reason for this is simple. You can scale it up or down much more easily, assuming a single kilogram or 2.1 pounds. Honestly, we're not really that worried about the freedom units. We're working with both System International and reasonably civilized metric numbers for the most part. You want a 35%, or in this case 350 grams of lean pork, 35% or 350 grams of lean beef, and roughly 300 grams or 30% of pork fat. You're going to want salt, a cure, which is generally sold as a ready-made kit, dextrose, black pepper, and paprika. It's roughly 26 grams, or about 0.25% salt, about 2.5 to 3 grams of your curing mixture. This is 0.025%. About 2 grams of sugar. Dextrose is preferable, but you can use what you have available, such as sucrose. A black pepper at about 2 grams, and we're going to add a combination of chili and paprika, approximately 2 grams of each. Now, the cure is rather important, as these cures generally are also sold as a starter culture. The starter culture is what's going to either make or break your salami. They are a collection of microorganisms, largely bacteria, that are involved in fermenting and curing the salami. Without these, the salami wouldn't really work. But at the same time, they need to be tailored. Well, mostly selected for during the making of the salami sausage. If you don't select for the right bacteria and other microorganisms during the preparation of your salami sausage, you'll find that you end up growing things that you do not want growing, and that's going to end up with you at best with food poisoning, and at worst, possibly never eating salami again. One of the things that the culture will do is that it will lead to the acidification of the salami sausage. This will help to prevent any unwanted bacteria that would lead to food poisoning from growing. And by using a culture, you effectively give the species that will do this a jump start. This will also help in adding flavour or ripening your salami. Depending on where you are in the world and the availability of different culture kits, you'll find that there are different options available to you. For the purpose of this video, we won't go into the depths of each individual variety, just understand that you should either talk with someone in your area who's familiar with what you have available, and make a decision based on the kind of flavours that you want in the end. And knowing what ingredients you need, the rough ratios, and what equipment, you can start making your salami. We will point out that if you so wish, you are able to shift the ratios a little bit. For example, if you are going to be using a more spice-rich mixture, you may wish to add more of the fat and more of the pork and less of the beef. The fat will help to counteract some of the bite in your spices, and the pork generally is a little bit more cooperative with that. Then again, if you're going to have a less, let's say, a spiced salami, you may wish to use more beef. To begin, first you want to clean and sanitize your equipment. We especially focus on the meat grinder and the sausage stuffer. This is because both are common to the salami, and if we make a mistake with one of these, it is a major way that microbes can get mixed into the meat, leading to food poisoning if we're lucky. We then go on to the meat itself. Now we cut these into small parts, generally before we do anything else, but you want to keep them relatively small when you cut them. The reason we cut them before we do anything else is that they go into the freezer for a couple of hours before we start actually putting them through the grinder. And by freezing them, it'll be a little bit easier to get them through the meat grinder because they're not frozen solid, but they're solid enough that everything works out reasonably well and the meat doesn't get overly warm in cooking. Understand, cooked meat from your grinder is not going to go well in your salami. The choice of which particular perforated disc to use in your meat grinder will vary by your taste. Generally, you want to go for a somewhat more coarse grind, so anything too fine will lead to something very much like a regular sausage, anything too coarse and it may not come together properly. You want coarse, but you don't want the coarsest setting on your meat grinder. Once everything is ground up and added to the bowl, you add your salt, cure, and any spices to it. You then mix them in, generally by massaging it almost like bread dough. It's a kneading process rather than a mixing process. You don't need to overdo this. Mixing for a couple of minutes is more than enough, and in fact you can get away with doing so with a food processor and a dough hook attached to it. Importantly, if you overmix or undermix, you can create problems. Undermixing it will lead to a very crumbly texture, and you won't really get a very nice salami. Overmixing it, however, it can lead to it binding too much together, and it doesn't quite work the way you want it to. Again, at that point, it's closer to a sausage than a salami. Now, you want to put this back into the fridge to cool down again. And while it's cooling, which shouldn't take very long, you put your sausage casing onto the sausage stuffer attachment and tie off the end that is at the very start now, the bit that's not on the sausage stuffer. If you don't do this, you won't have a sausage, you'll have mess all over where you're preparing. Now you bring your meat back out of the fridge, you put it into the meat grinder and sausage stuffer, and you begin filling the casing. You want to ensure that you get it as packed tightly as possible. You want there to be as little air as humanly possible inside of the casing. Air pockets are a good way to grow bacteria. Bacteria are a good way to get food poisoning. Once you've finished filling it up, either you've run out of casing or you've run out of filling for it, you want to tie off the other end of your sausage casing. Now, the final step before you do anything else is to take a sterilized and sharp needle and poke any air holes that are in it. This will get the air out and hopefully prevent bacteria from growing in it. Next, we have the fermentation or curing process, and this is the time-consuming part. First of all, you want to start by leaving it in a reasonably room temperature area for about a day. The reason you want to do this is that it allows the outside to dry off enough that you begin drawing out the moisture from inside the center. This minimizes the risk that you'll dry the outside and prevent moisture from the very inner part of it coming out. Once the sausage has changed color, generally to a lighter, sort of almost dead-looking appearance, and yes, the description may sound disgusting, but it'll make more sense, you can shift this to a cold storage place. You do not want the place you're storing it to have less than 75% humidity though, and that's key. If you dry the sausage that you're making too quickly, you won't be able to get the moisture out of the center of it as it sort of gets stuck in there, as there's a band of completely dry salami, and then there's an inner core of still fresh moist salami. You also don't want the temperature to be more than 18 degrees Celsius. In fact, we would arguably say you want to keep it as low as you can. However, the lower the temperature, the longer it will take to dry. And this is the hardest part. It can take a long time for your salami to finish fermenting or curing. Some say as little as 2 to 3 weeks, others considerably more. You'll get an idea as to whether or not it's ready by not only its appearance but some of its behavior. If you want to though, and if this is more aimed at those who are intending to long-term store their salami, you can hang it for much longer and dry it considerably more. Generally speaking, if you keep it reasonably moist in terms of the humidity and everything else, you can keep it hung indefinitely. But if you want to be able to eat it conveniently, you want to take it down somewhere around 2 to 4 weeks. In terms of storing the salami, you want to keep it somewhere where the humidity is low. Again, this is down to the fact that if there's humidity in the air, it will re-enter into the salami sausage and you'll begin developing issues such as mold. Conversely, if it's too dry, you end up drying the sausage further. You'll know that your salami's just right when the end of it no longer wobbles about freely, but it also doesn't nearly break or have absolutely no movement in it whatsoever. That's generally when the salami would be just about right. Once you're happy with the state of your salami, we do recommend taking it down and putting it into vacuum sealed bags, and then freezing it if you're not going to use it immediately. You don't necessarily have to freeze it. In theory, once you have it vacuum packed and it's in the fridge, for instance, it should keep for a very long time. Plenty long before you're going to have to worry about it going bad, you'll have eaten it. But nonetheless, a freezer is generally going to be safer. If you keep it in the refrigerator, it'll be good for several months, a freezer considerably longer, assuming vacuum packed. If it's not, your time frame will get much shorter. Just be aware of that. This is how you make your own salami. Understand, you can, with relative ease, make salami. The making is not the hard part. It's the curing or fermenting stage and ensuring that everything you mix together is done correctly and safely. Even using a culture, you still have concerns about the safety of what you're doing. It doesn't ensure absolutely that no matter what, your salami will be good. All it does is drastically improve the probability that what happens in there as far as microorganism growth goes is to your favor. And that's the key here. Making your own tasty salami is relatively straightforward. Getting it right is the hard part, and you may have to have several goes at this before everything works the way you want it to. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.